Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of what I like to call the Chase with Jace. I'm your host, Jace Lejeune of Gridiron Football, LSU beat writer for Gridiron Football, and it's a big week. I'm with Jake Thompson from Ole Miss Spirit On3. He does a great job covering the beat for the Ole Miss Rebels. And Jake, it's a big one down Baton Rouge. How excited are you about it?
Yeah, everybody had this one circled on their schedule when it was put out almost, back in December last year. It's always a big one, especially when they play it around October, close to Chris or close to Halloween. Got the nighttime kickoff as everybody knew it was in that window between 5 and 7, but then they nailed it down to 6:30. So sun will be setting. I know that they've announced that this is kind of a big game for them. I think homecoming, if I'm getting that correct, or some other stuff like that, and 100-year anniversary, and all the stuff to make Ole Miss fans a little nervous to be heading there on Saturday night because we know what it's about. But this feels like a different Ole Miss team that's kind of maybe more prepared for the mystique of all that's going to happen in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, you mentioned it. It's always fun and interesting when the Rebels and the Tigers go against each other. We've seen the weird, we've seen the wacky. I mean, last year was one of those examples. If you like defense last year, I think defensive coordinators better cover their eyes. That was a lot of points being scored on the board last year in a very exciting game, 55-49. Ole Miss was able to get the win last year, and not a lot of teams were able to just outduel Jaden Daniels, a Heisman Trophy quarterback, and two first-round receivers. But that's what the Ole Miss did. Ole Miss Rebels did last year. Now with Jackson Dart coming back, with how they can put points up on the board, Jake, and knowing that LSU's offense is off to a pretty good start here. Do you see this being a shootout like it was last year? Or you see a little bit more defense or a little bit of both? What you're thinking as far as what kind of game this could potentially be?
I think it may start out as a defensive game. I know both sides are missing some key pieces, or some one side's Ole Miss is kind of waiting on some guys to heal up, or if they'll be ready to go, or try to give it a go. And I know obviously LSU's been down the ball and hit with the injury bug. I think on the start almost, and obviously the big loss with Perkins there on y'all side. But it's I think it's going to be a defensive out game. The Ole Miss offense obviously put up those video game looked like they were playing instantly football game first month of the season, and on freshman rookie mode against non-conference teams. But since kind of even against the Wake Forest team, and then obviously Kentucky in last week, offense looked a little bit better against South Carolina, but as they face tougher defenses, it's a little harder for them. They've kind of been disjointed at times. Start out fast, but then kind of gets a little sluggish in middle parts. And then you don't know, they kind of have to just fight their way through it. But Dart even said Saturday when I asked him, about this defense, and he talked about how much confidence he has now that they don't have to go out and score 7 points every time they have the football. As a Saints fan and others down there, it can relate. It's like watching some of these Saints teams the last few years, where somebody you had to rely on the defense because the offense was struggling. But I think it's going to be a Philadelphia game. Then whoever probably has that edge on the offense side, I think it may start to pull away. But I think Vegas has got it right with a 2.5, 3 point. With I think it's Ole Miss, but that could sway once
Mhm.
these availability reports roll out. But I think it's going to be close, and you know as we've seen, it's either a shootout and by close with 100 something points scored, or it's a 20 total points and still you win by close. It's just how it's always going to be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I know that Ole Miss fans are feeling much better about what the team is looking like, considering 2 weeks ago it was their first opportunity, and now Ole Miss has blown out a lot of opponents, which they should blow out, and they've done. They take care of business and blew out those opponents, and they finally had that first task, right? That first tough task against Kentucky. Obviously, the Rebels weren't able to pass that test against the Wildcats, but they did bounce back against a team LSU really had their hands full when they played them at South Carolina, and Ole Miss was able to really control that game and dominate that game and not let the South Carolina crowd get into it. So a bounce back week last week. What do you have to say about the win last week for the Rebels against South Carolina, and just reassuring fans about the type of team they could potentially be?
I think with the way they started, obviously they were helped with Beamer trying to, I guess, do his best Kiffin impersonation going forward on fourth down instead of using his offense, but doing it with the fake punt and got stuffed. And you had Ash for one appearance in the game, a fumble that Baltimore recovered, and they scored on those two early drives to get up 14-0. And I say it was massive because obviously LSU's atmosphere is in its own stratosphere, but South Carolina's home games are also known for what that atmosphere and that crowd can be. Circa 2009 against that also Ole Miss game when Sandstorm, when they became an EDM club with that music playing before kickoff and the crowd getting into it. But the fact for Ole Miss to go in and quiet that crowd and actually sending people, that press box so high up outside the stadium, they were starting to leave, go out in that first quarter and the first half when things didn't quite go their way. So for them to handle that kind of crowd, because it was loud, and have it kind of under their belt and have that sample size heading into it, even to be times 10, but to have that and be able to know they can play well in that environment, I think that was crucial for them in terms of this week. But just for them, a team, they needed that confidence game. And, it's not a lot of confidence games the rest of the way for them. They played all their non-conference. The SEC slate is what it is. We've seen it these past 2 weeks. I think it's going to be cannibalized. Everybody's going to get beaten up. So it's not like, oh, well, we got this. Man, you can't say Vandy's a get better game for anybody anymore. So
No.
it's just an incredible conference to be in. And so for them to have kind of lick their wounds and improve and trial by fire was massive last week. And I could see it again, that confidence in their eyes when we talked to some players on Monday and Tuesday. It wasn't the shock and just the jaw on the floor like it was a week prior after that Kentucky game. So, they checked off all the boxes. I know the offense would love to have had some better drives, put up points, only 3 points in the second half, only threw the ball once fourth quarter. It was just kind of a weird game. Once they got out to the lead and Carolina it was just kind of a weird game. But I think they're prepared for all those X factors now because of having this game before better.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Let's see. And if anything, like you mentioned, Jake, I know that you said the offense wasn't at its most the crispest, in the game against South Carolina. But you have to be encouraged with how the defense has been playing, and really the big thing with Lane Kiffin coming in, and we all always knew about them scoring points and making it exciting for Ole Miss fans, exciting brand of football. But to win championships, contend for championships, you have to be really good in the trenches on the offensive line, the defensive line, and it seems like the defensive front is really at a good spot right
Yeah, that's the Georgia game last year was kind of that flashpoint for Kiffin and defensive coordinator building for how they did not play and how they didn't look the same. They look on the same level of as Georgia's or Alabama's in that regard. Even in warm-ups, he kind of went to that off the bus test or that airport test that everybody talks about, where they look like they're playmakers. They're just big people, and they went to work. They got Walter Nolan, they got Princely, Monty Allen. And then they've also just had guys with J.J. P, Jerry Ivy, and Xavier Harris. That defensive line is probably the best it's been as a complete unit, not just having like one or two playmakers to make up for everything else. And probably half a decade, not longer, maybe back to like when Kendichis were here, 2014, 2015. So it's been a long time since they've had a defensive line that feels elite, and everybody on that side of the ball has confidence in. We asked some secondary guys yesterday, and what's it like? I said, man, my job's so much easier than it used to be with those guys up front cleaning up everything. So that's been a huge thing for them. And also it's been a beat up defensive line finding success. They didn't play at South Carolina last week. One of those we're going to have to keep watching on the availability reports. He kind of got banged up at the end of Kentucky with the ankle sprain, and everybody knows how those ankle sprains can be, especially for guys who are putting pressure on the feet and the linemen 3 hours at a time. So the fact they're still doing it without having 100% on that side of the ball is even more encouraging if they can have an extended season, get in the playoffs, and then get everybody healthy.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the injuries, and that's what I'm going to go into. I know LSU, like you mentioned, they've been hit pretty good with the injury bug as well. I mean, as far as like key players, I mean, Harold Perkins is obviously the big name on the LSU side, and then John Emery at running back, he's out for the year as well, and Jacoby and Gilroy too. So those are big, really names. But I think LSU's been able to overcome it in some ways, as tough as those injuries are. Now, you mentioned Princely. I know he's been banged up for Ole Miss, and then Trey Harris, obviously on the offensive side of the football. LSU fans definitely saw a lot of Trey Harris last year, and he's definitely one of the best receivers in the country. I followed his prep career at Como, so I knew how he was coming out of high school. But what's the update with Trey Harris and some of the other injuries that's going on for Ole Miss's side?
He got rolled up there on a play, a pass out of the wing, and I think the second to last offensive possession of the first half, and just kind of got up. It was a little slow getting up. Then was walking around throughout that kind of the keep walking so it doesn't get too stiff on a walk. Is what it like on the side. I did play that last possession, did play all the second half. Kiffin and them, or Kiffin being cool, like any coach would be with an injury to that type of player. Uh, we hope to play him, but we're practicing as if we don't. So he's kind of like Princely. I think if they were forced to put something out now instead of 4.5 hours from now or any other time the rest of the week, they'd probably say out, at least as a gut. But if from a player's perspective, what we're kind of told when we're asking some other people is they're at least telling people themselves they're going to play, which that's just the competitor on this. So I expect them to make the trip up and get go. I think game time decision is probably never been more applicable than it is for those two heading into Saturday.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Competitors like that, great players like that, they won't be out there for the big time games, and you expect them to at least try, to at least make it for those games, definitely. And I know Trey Harris is like the big receiver, really, for this offense, the big go-to guy for Jackson Dart. But who are some of the other key skill guys that really LSU needs to keep an eye on Saturday?
Juice Wells, a South Carolina transfer. They tried to will him to have a big game last week. He was heading that way, and then that big catch and then fumble as he was trying to, I think, shift the ball so he could stick it over the pylon as he was kind of angling toward out of bounds, fumbled it right off the back. So that was kind of a tough one for him, but he's had signs and shown signs of being at number two behind Harris. Obviously, I think Juice is going to be their number one if they're practicing. How Kiffin is saying they're practicing this week planning without Harris. Joey Watkins has always been that reliable slot guy. I really look for King scoring in the tight end game to step up, either just because I think it needs to, but it may have to by default without Harris. And if Wells can't be that guy, and Saturday, I think they're going to have to try and open up the tight end game more than what we've seen so far. And everybody had high hopes for pre-scoring after that big 10-catch game in the Pitch Bowl against Penn State. Kind of finally saw what they saw when they were recruiting him out of the portal from Memphis the year before, and so haven't seen that yet. But I think that's also because some of the injuries on the offensive line as they've required pre-scoring and Daquan White to kind of be an added blocker on that offensive line, and that may never really do much, just on their own catching the ball. But I think that's going to change once we start getting into the SEC conference, and the O line is slowly starting to get healthier. There were guys healthy Saturday that we hadn't seen, but they just didn't play much. I think that'll change with another week of rest, quote unquote, under their belt. So that's who I look for. And the run game has just still been a mystery. Henry Parrish has had signs. He's really kind of getting banged up a little. Matt Jones, I think he's banged up. We'll learn more about that throughout the week. But Ulysses Bentley has been the biggest mystery for everybody. As we thought he was kind of the guy with Parrish, but he has just been absent. We've been asking and kind of getting the coach speak from Kiffin on that. But if Jones is banged up, as we've heard and being told, it may, like I said, a pre-score, and they force him to finally see what Bentley can do. And he had a good game last year against LSU kind of paired with Jenkins in that run
Mhm.
game last year. So I think there's a lot of skill guys key on, but it's just they're going to have to execute it themselves. There's plenty of talent on paper, but we've got to see more than what we've seen these first two SEC games.
Yeah, and you get the feeling going to this game with Ole Miss having a loss, with LSU having a loss, that this is almost like a playoff game before really the college football playoff really starts. With this could potentially be an elimination game here. So for Ole Miss's side of things, what scares this team the most about LSU? If you're looking at LSU, what aspect on their team you think will could give Ole Miss the most fits?
I think it starts with the passing game. I know I was talking about how the secondary has been preaching about the D line, saying that their job's been so much easier because they just have to focus on kind of their one assignment, not if a run breaks through or something like that, because of how well they're cleaning up and even linebackers. But I think Usmeyer is able to have time, and if the LSU line keep that defensive front back and give him time, I think the passing game is going to be the biggest key because the secondary is still kind of hit or miss at times. Trey Amos is doing well.
Mhm.
Uh, I think one of the highest graded guys in his position and in the PFF grades. But
Mhm.
the rest of the secondary has their moments where they just kind of look lost. Kind of what happened when Kentucky converted that fourth and long out of the blue to set up their chance to win. Isaiah Hamilton transfers got lost, got turned around when Barry Brown just kind of juked them. So they've shown some struggles when the passing game has had success or the opposing team passing game. So I think Nussmeier and his arm is the biggest key. I know they know he can run, but it's not a Daniels threat. It's a he's got to run
Mhm.
to keep a play going or it breaks down. It's not a hey Jaden you're going to run it or Garrett you're going to run it. It's so I think that's the biggest key is to try to the first and second levels of the defense contain keep the game in their area and not have to rely on any potential deep plays or chunk plays. I think.
And we are joined once again by Jake Thompson. You can follow all of his great work. He does a great job with the with the Rebels at Jake Thompson On3, and then obviously you can follow the beat for On3 at OM Spirit On3 as well for all their great work. And of course, towards the end of the show, we want to make sure to if Jake has anything that he wants to plug, any stories, anything that they have going cooking right now at On3, we'll definitely give him an opportunity to do that. Yeah, Jake. I mean, as far as like a Jackson Dart, right? I mean, coming into another season, high expectations for him, and the season he had last year for the Rebels, and how everything finished with them winning a power. I mean, winning a big time New Year's Six bowl game too at the end of the season was big. So going to another season, I think a lot of eyes been on Jackson Dart. He had a rocket hot start, sizzling hot start to start the season. I know the Kentucky game was definitely a little bit off for sure for everybody. So as far as him and his mentality goes, I know he's a little different. He's big, he's physical, he doesn't slide. He's that guy that wants to win and any means necessary. So, what have you seen from Jackson Dart this season?
Like you said, he came out of the gates just kind of a gunslinger. I mean, still because of his hot start, still kind of leads at least the FBS side of things. One of the top quarterbacks, top passer in football in the FBS. Uh, some of those numbers have kind of come down a little bit now that some of the SEC games, those averages are factored in. And yeah, he did not have his best stuff against Kentucky. He looked off at times, just kind of trying to force stuff, force cheap throws, not giving what the offense or the defense was giving him. Maybe even the drive before, he would completely different next possession, and saw a little bit better from that Saturday at South Carolina, especially the first half. And two scoring possessions off the bat. Offense looked crisper. He looked to kind of be checking down, and like I said, I was hoping to see more than what we saw without Trey Harris, just to see because that's kind of been his knock is he doesn't look off or he looks at Trey or whoever that target's going to be on that play and doesn't check his progressions. We've seen that evolve a little bit this year, but at times it's a tight game. Maybe there's pressure on that particular drive, but we don't see it as much. So I'm hoping we start seeing him do those checkdowns. So I think it's something they're going to need for sure is to just take what's given. Death by a thousand cuts type things.
Mhm.
It don't all have to be 59, 56, home run passes every play. So that's still what I'd like to see from him, and I think that can happen because he's shown it other times. I know it was lesser or maybe inferior defenses, so to speak, in September, but I think that's something that he can do. He's just got to, I think, get out of some habits that he's had over his career.
Yeah, this is a great opportunity here in Death Valley. If he performs like he did last year against LSU, have that type of game again, this could definitely get him back in that conversation, right? Of being in the Heisman Trophy conversation for sure. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention him. I mean, when you go in the short line, goal line, short yardage, it's pretty hard to stop when you have a guy that's 325 pounds you can snap the football to in JJ. So, I mean, how did that really start? Like, was he like a former offensive player, like a tight end or a running back that converted to defense? And it's like, hey, he's a big guy that can move with the football. How did that kind of all transpire, getting him some goal line snaps?
Oh, what you've seen in an Ole Miss uniform, and maybe Auburn fans saw a little bit in his short time there. That's just like a tenth of a percent of what Oxford High and Chris Cutcliffe utilized him as in high school. I covered him in high school, so I watched his whole, I guess, mostly all of his playing career, and he was a tight end for Oxford. They weren't just using him on third short or first and goal, second goal. He was a threat middle of the field. So I mean, he's always been one that's been comfortable holding the football, not trying to swat the football out of somebody's hand. So no, that's what he's been doing. It's not doesn't shock me. I know he's taking a little bit more harder shots. He's kind of dealing with a banged up shoulder when he landed hard on a fumble in the Kentucky game. It was just kind of one of those fluke plays. It wasn't like a hard hit. So else he just kind of landed the wrong way. So he's been dealing with that on his shoulder, but you wouldn't know it with how he's been playing the rest of that game, and then how they still lined him up against South Carolina. He's going to put his head down and go, and he's got to be up there with the highest career touchdown totals of a defensive lineman, I would assume. But I think that's too hard of a stat to track back beyond like 20 years. But he's doing incredible things, and if he did more of it, and this was a different era, like the Indama Kasu type era, I think he would be getting the Heisman buzz. But that just speaks to what he does and what he offers, and with the run game kind of struggling at times, it's been a blessing that for Kiffin, they tried him out and saw what he could do last year, and he's kind of that safety. We need those 6 points.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard to stop. I mean, definitely hard to stop from going backwards. That's for sure. Uh, how do you think Lane Kiffin's going to dictate? I mean, a big topic of conversation is tempo. With Ole Miss, how they go up tempo and how can put stress on the defense. Now, is this one of these type of games, in your opinion, that they're going to go up tempo a whole lot and try playing this type of track meet, or do you think they slow the game up a little bit and try to keep LSU's offense off the field, or just kind of dictates on how the flow of the game is going to be going in Baton Rouge?
I think no matter what the game says or dictates, or what we're all saying in the press box, or fans are saying in the stands, Lane Kiffin only has one speed, and so it's just
Mhm.
he is the fast and furious franchise of coaches. I mean, he's going to go, and it's either going to be a beautiful ending or a collision and explosion of some kind of magnitude with whatever he chooses to do. But he's always going to keep that up tempo going, and that's just how he's always been. That's the offense. That's the scheme they got set up as tempo. Which that's why this defense is so successful, because they're going against this offense practice, so they're facing that tempo day in day out. So if all this faces a defense that has that same cardio and can hang with them, in a game, ready for that because they're facing a rested or a defense that's sees that every day. So that's why I think for Kiffin, obviously start game. I'm sure there's scripts. Everybody's got their scripted
Yeah.
plays. Those are going to be all tempo. Spot the ball, can't get back to the line. Go. They're the kings of like the minute or less opening guys if they can score. I mean, that's what they do. For the fastest offenses per play between player per play, I think it's one of those weird deep, I don't know,
Hmm.
sabermetric stats, but no, I think he adjusts, but I think it's like later in the game. I think if he can go fast, he's going to go fast all quarters. But if there's something we see, he's like, I'm going to milk the clock. He has shown that more than he used to, but it's still like seeing Haley's comment. He's going to try to go for broke more times than not.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And like you said, it's hard. the game plan. I mean, that first drive. I mean, he's excellent in orchestrating those first drives, and a lot of the times, Ole Miss is very successful from the start of football games. Now, if this game, which there's a really good chance this could be, if this game goes down to like 2 or 3 points, usually special teams could be a factor. You know, I actually might could decide the game. So if this comes to a point where Ole Miss's special teams can decide this football game, how confident are you in that third phase of the game for Ole Miss if they can get that done?
I know Caden Davis just that kick, which was very uncharacteristic. The miss,
Hmm.
but also just how the how far off target it was. There was just that was a lot of uncharacteristicness in that snap and the kick and hold and everything. So no, Ole Miss has all the confidence in the world in him. He's got a distance that's in the 50s. I think he said it when he was at A&M before he transferred over a couple years ago. I got a practice. I'm sure the Texas wind helped with this a little bit, but I think he kicked one into the 60s or something like that. Now I'm not saying he can do that in every setting or everything, but that's the confidence they have in him. So no, if it comes down to a field goal, Lane's going to hesitate to put him back out there in one of those situations. I don't. I think they all knew that was a fluke and not will not happen more times than not in a situation like the Kentucky game. So no, special teams they feel really confident in.
Yeah, and there's a good chance it could come down to that. I know LSU special teams that was a problem with Brian Kelly first coming in, and they seem like they've cleaned it up a little bit this year in the return game and in some other aspects special teams wise. I mean, it looks a pretty much an even game on paper. I mean, not number 9 Ole Miss, number 13 LSU. Both Jackson Dart and Garrett Nussmeier are having great seasons this year. Jackson Dart's thrown for over 2,100 yards and 13 touchdowns. Garrett Nussmeier's thrown for over 1,600 yards and 15 touchdowns. So I mean, it's pretty even on those fronts there too. I mean, defensively, I mean, Ole Miss is definitely has definitely shored up the defensive front. LSU, it was, let's just say, not ideal defensively last year, but they've seemed like they're doing a better job of forcing turnovers and taking the football away. There's still some big lapses they've given up in explosive plays, which could be a problem against this Ole Miss team. But looks like a pretty evenly matched game on paper. Jake, I'm sure you're probably going to be writing about your predictions and everything later in the week, but this show will also be promoted, posted later in the week as well. So, do you have a prediction for this game, a score prediction, and who do you think takes that step closer to contending for an SEC championship and a college football playoff berth?
Yeah, that's a good point. That first one there, the SEC championship game slots, I guess is what we call them now, are
Hmm.
wide open with what happened last week, and who knows what happens to the way. So that's still up for grabs, especially with both teams. One loss. LSU has only played one conference game, so they have even had a loss yet. No, so everything's up for grabs. This is probably a bubble game, which I know that's becoming stealing basketball now and using bubble watch for football with this playoff. Part of me just says this is finally where Ole Miss goes in and ekes out steals, and maybe not steals a word because this is a good team, but gets that
Hmm.
rare night win and finally first win. And they're 0-7 since winning in 2008 down there. So I know that's kind of the onus is on that. I think Ole Miss, what the score is, if you ask me in 5 minutes, I want to say like a high scoring game. And if you ask me now, I want to say middle to like a
Hmm.
conservative type score, just because I
Hmm.
think something, everybody has expectations for what this LSU game is, and it's always the opposite. I did not foresee the 55-49 game last year, or maybe one team would
Hmm.
have a lot of the points and one wouldn't. So, but if I had to put just a score on it right now, say 31-24 Ole Miss. Dart gets
Hmm.
a clutch touchdown in the second half, and defense holds on. That's where I'm leaning right now.
Yeah. There's a good chance that that can happen. I mean, this can go either way. Before we wrap up as well, do you think there's more pressure here? I mean, I feel like there's some pressure on both programs too. With Brian Kelly going to year number three, and Lane Kiffin, especially with the team that he assembled through the transfer portal, through NIL, through all that. With this year too, do you think there's more pressure on Ole Miss to win this game?
Yeah, just because of how the reaction was, I saw and witnessed after the Kentucky loss, because it felt like the 14 playoff world again, where you could have a loss in the SEC or you're out of it. All right, you lose one, you're playing for like a good Florida bowl game, the Citrus Bowl, or something that's just underneath the playoff, or
Hmm.
New Year's Six before it got part of this playoffs now. It felt like that again, and just of how the team looked and how they played, and you go, well, that was game one of seven more SEC games. But Kentucky was not slotted to be that tough game. You know, Coming up, it was the LSU, Oklahoma, Georgia's were supposed to be those tough games. But then after this past weekend, and with everything, like I said, they got some help with chaos, so
Hmm.
that fixed the vibe a little bit. But with all the chips and call this the last dance and how much they put into this, it is insane that he added 18 benefits on Miss postseason chances now yearly. Um, yeah, another loss is going to be tough to swallow, and it's going to make this season kind of just feel like 10-2, because you don't know what else is going to happen. So you don't know if 10-2 is going to get you in, because you don't know how
Hmm.
strong the conference will look going forward. You don't know what those committee members are going to say in that room in
Yeah.
Texas once they start doing this stuff in November. So you can't
Hmm.
bank on that. So a 10-2 season, and you don't make it as one of those tough teams, which is unfathomable to think this fan base would be
Hmm.
upset with 10-2 what
Right.
we were, pre 2019. But that's the reality of it, is that all the chips were put in for this to be a special year, and if you don't even get invited to the dance to see how special it can be, it's tough to swallow when you're going to not Citrus Bowls up, turn your nose up, but it's not what
Mhm.
everybody's expecting, so you don't want that to be the feeling come December.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, for a two-loss team, it definitely for a team to make it in the expand playoff, that definitely expanded its odds. Got a lot of higher odds based on what happened last week, and Ole Miss was able to survive, which was a wild and crazy weekend in college football. I mean, Alabama falling to Vanderbilt, what was insane. With even the start off the day with Texas A&M totally dominating Missouri, and then later also it's crazy that Arkansas defeating a top five team and Tennessee gets overshadowed, but that's what kind of weekend it was in college football. So I guess like what do you think just about the parity right now in college football and the number of teams? I mean, Vanderbilt being Alabama, you don't see that. I mean, obviously. So well, what are your thoughts on just the parity of college football and everything that's the craziness that's going on right now?
I think Kiffin summed up when it was a very surreal press conference, sitting in the press conference room someone has a visiting team. There's TV behind us, which I don't think I've ever seen a TV in the media room, an opposing visiting team
Yeah.
locker room. So we were watching that. He walks in and kind of stops and looks at it, and like you said, almost same thing he said. We should kind of watch this soaking in, and it's probably a once in a lifetime thing that we're watching, and just to know that history Kiffin had with Alabama and all of that, and sitting in there watching him watch a Vanderbilt team beat Alabama was just, I think, I put punctuated how strange the rest of this season might be, now that everybody's kind of getting into the meat of their conference schedules. Non-conference games are kind of done. September's come and gone. Middle of September's rolling in. Uh, I think there's more parity now than I probably would have thought Wednesday of last week before this past Saturday, because I thought honestly that Alabama Georgia game, everybody like Milrow settled high. That's it. Milrow had his moment. This could be it. Texas is undefeated. Archer
Hmm.
Quinn put both in. They're both, one can run circles around the other team. So you were feeling like it was going to be Texas and Alabama and playing in Atlanta, and everybody else just kind of here already, like it used to be with Georgia and Alabama, or the good those LSU teams with Burrow and them
Hmm.
were doing that, and everybody else was playing to finish off, see where they go. So I think parity now is stronger than it was, and and I was shocked to see how much parity. Because Vandy's looked at, they should probably be 5-0. I mean, they're
Yeah.
an overtime against Missouri. I know they'd have Missouri game back with what Missouri did at A&M this
Oh
weekend,
yeah, yeah.
and then Georgia State. That Georgia State game, they're going to be feeling great. I mean, that's a signature win now for them. So uh, it's
Right.
it's it's just crazy, top to bottom. And and if you're Ole Miss, you need Kentucky to look fantastic. You need Kentucky to kind of spoil the party against Vanderbilt this week. You need them to look good the rest of the way. So, parity is here for now. Now we'll see what this Saturday does, and if
Yeah.
everybody's kind of back in line. But it should be a fun, back half of the season.
Yeah, if it's anything like it is already, boy, buckle your seatbelts. It's going to be a fun ride, that's for sure. I mean, Brian Kelly even said, I think it was after the narrow win against South Carolina. I was like, well, I guess you look at the transitive property, right? I mean, if Kentucky able to blow out South Carolina and Kentucky giving Georgia hell and South LSU being South Carolina, and Brian Kelly was like, well, I guess we can slaughter Georgia if you base it on that process. But it's college football. You're betting on 22-year-olds, and crazy things happen. So in college football. Well, Jake, anything that you want to promote for On3 for OM Spirit, for anything going on, anything that you're writing about, anything that you want to plug here on the Chase with Jace?
Yeah, obviously to get the Ole Miss perspective for the rest of the week leading up to Saturday, omspirit.com. If you've got any family, friends, family members who are Ole Miss fans that you just can't talk to this week, you can be nice and tell them we got a 50% off sale on our annual yearly subscriptions to look into that. But I'm at J Thompson, letter N and 3 on X, Twitter, whatever we're calling it. So, but yeah, that's kind of where you can find all of our stuff. And I appreciate you having me on today.
Absolutely, Jake. Once again, guys, make sure to follow Jake. All his posts on X. I'm still getting used to calling it X, really, Jake. But you can say at Jake Thompson On3. That's where you can follow all his stuff. Jake, I appreciate you coming on. Enjoy the football game, and I guess I'll see you on Saturday in Tiger Stadium.
Yeah, Jason, I look forward to talking to you Saturday. Hopefully, that won't be as hot as it says it will be.
Oh yeah, me myself included. Thanks, Jake.
Appreciate it.